9 Psychology Laws of Self-Respect. There is a kind of person who will do almost anything for someone else, rearrange their schedule, swallow their discomfort, stay quiet when they should speak, and then lie awake that same night feeling vaguely hollow. Not angry, exactly, not even sure what went wrong, just that quiet, familiar ache of having given something away that they didn't really want to give. If you know that feeling, you already understand more about this than most people ever will. The strange thing is, the people who experience this most intensely are rarely selfish. They are, in almost every measurable way, the opposite. They are the ones who remember how others are feeling in a crowded room, the ones who sense when something is wrong before anyone says a word, the ones who have spent their entire lives being described as kind, thoughtful, easy to be around, and who privately wonder why that never seems to protect them from feeling invisible. Society tends to frame what they're struggling with as a confidence problem, or a people-pleasing habit that needs breaking, or low self-esteem. Those labels exist somewhere in the neighborhood of the truth, but they miss the deeper geography entirely. Because what's actually happening has a name, and it's more precise, more forgiving, and more useful than any of those words. It's the psychology of self-respect, and it is almost never explained correctly. Self-respect is not the same thing as self-esteem. Self-esteem is largely a feeling. It rises and falls with achievement, approval, comparison. Self-respect is structural. It is not about how good you feel about yourself on a given day. It is about the baseline relationship you have with your own needs, your own limits, your own inner life. Psychologists who study dignity and autonomy consistently find that self-respect functions less like a mood and more like a nervous system setting, a default orientation the body holds towards itself, often laid down long before conscious thought has any say. Research in developmental psychology, particularly work building on attachment theory, shows that the nervous system learns very early whether it is safe to take up space, not through explicit instruction, but through accumulated experience. When a child's distress is met with attunement, warmth, presence, responsiveness, the system registers a quiet but powerful message: your inner experience matters. When that attunement is inconsistent, absent, or conditional on performance, the system learns a different lesson. Not loudly, not dramatically, it just learns to compress, to minimize, to make itself smaller and easier in exchange for connection, because connection was the priority and the self was the cost of it. This is not a wound in the way people usually imagine wounds. It is an adaptation, a survival strategy built by a young nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems are designed to do, finding the configuration most likely to keep the person safe and loved. The problem is not that the strategy failed. The problem is that it worked, and so it became a permanent feature of how the person moves through the world. None of this makes someone weak. It makes them experienced at managing other people's comfort at the expense of their own, which is an extraordinary skill with an enormous price tag. It is also worth saying clearly, there is no superior way to be wired. People who find self-respect more naturally available to them were often raised in different conditions, not better ones. Some of them carry their own costs, a difficulty with intimacy, a resistance to feedback, a quiet aloneness that comes from rarely having needed to adapt to others. Every nervous system made its trade. The comparison isn't between broken and whole. It's between different configurations, each with its own set of gifts and its own set of losses. Here is the part that tends to surprise people most. The individuals who struggle most with self-respect are often the ones with the most refined internal compass, because the attunement that was trained outward towards reading rooms, managing moods, absorbing other people's needs, is also capable of extraordinary depth when turned inward. The capacity was always there. It was simply directed away from the self as a matter of early necessity. Which means that what looks like a deficit is in part a misdirection. The sensitivity isn't the problem. The sensitivity is actually the resource. What changes is not the person, but the orientation, a gradual, sometimes slow, sometimes surprising process of learning to include oneself in the circle of people who deserve consideration. The 9 laws that psychological research keeps returning to around self-respect are not commandments. They are patterns, observations about how people who carry a stable sense of their own worth tend to think, respond, and relate, not because they decided to be different, but because something in them shifted, often quietly, often after a period of significant personal cost made the old configuration impossible to maintain. You don't have to change who you are to access them. In many ways, they will feel strangely familiar, like recognizing a version of yourself that was always there, waiting for the conditions to make it safe to emerge. If any of this is landing somewhere real, the next part goes deeper. Because self-respect isn't just a feeling to cultivate. It turns out to be one of the most significant predictors of almost everything else. The quality of relationships, the ability to tolerate uncertainty, even physical health outcomes that most people would never connect to something this quiet and internal. There's more here than most people realize, and it belongs to you more than you've probably been led to believe.